Hey, you fucks, this is Everyone's Wrong. I'm Dave, aka the Great White North.
I'm Dustin Dark.
I'm Ed Smith.
And tonight we are joined by
Kyle Guerin.
Kyle Guerin. I was going to ask you how to pronounce your last name. It's got a funny spelling. I was going to call you like Guerin or something.
It's like Creole, so I think it's supposed to be like French, like technically like Guerin or something like that.
Guerin.
But I've never heard anybody pronounce it like that, so.
Have you heard of Geechee?
No.
Like Gullah Geechee? Okay, so the black and Creole migrated from like the Gullah Geechee Islands off the coast of South Carolina to Florida. Weren't very welcome in Florida. Ended up going to Creole. So my grandmother was Geechee. Anyway, beside the point. And the show where we have better things to talk about.
Okay, so a few weeks ago we had on the alt-right, and now we have the counter position.
Far left.
The far left.
As far left as it gets, I guess.
Yeah, so why don't you explain your position to us?
So, I guess technically you could call it kind of communist, but I prefer kind of like this a post-Marxist kind of thought, because for me personally, I'm like a scientist, so I prefer like what's backed by evidence. You know what I mean? So I'm not the kind of guy who's going to say like, oh, let's gather everybody up, let's toss them all in camps, like let's do some crazy shit. Like I personally am like, well, what's going to work for us to get us to that next stage where we're like basically everybody's better off, And to me, that's like kind of like the foundation of like leftism and socialism. And like, I feel like the major issue, like when you look on the internet, is everybody's focusing on like these kind of like internet narcissistic personality types, that are kind of like out there to get views and get clicks and like talk about like all this crazy shit, and like everybody's like, oh yeah, this guy, that guy, they're arguing about this, they're arguing about that. But then meanwhile, they're all making like 30, 40K on Patreon, from their like fanboys and just like saying blah, blah, blah. But then when I'm online, like the number of people who have actually read the literature that everybody's complaining about, watch the movie, so to speak, that they're reviewing, it's like 1 in every 100.
Okay, so hang on 1 second. So you said that you're not the type to throw people in camps, yet I saw a post from you the other day stating that, re-education or killing in the streets, whatever. So is that a persona that you're putting on online, or do you actually believe that?
Yeah, it's like half shit posting, half like trolling, half trying to get reactions, like when it's online,
Okay,
like,
but you just said that you didn't like that.
Yeah.
So you don't like the other people that do that, but you do it yourself.
No, I don't care.
You get what I'm
about
saying?
that. No, I think it's funny. I like when other people do it. It's funny.
Yeah, but you just said about the personas online. Go ahead, Dustin. Go ahead.
Well, that's.
Actually, I'm back out of this. Go ahead. Yeah, about the personas online, since you have one.
So
That's a good question.
you just said that, like people are blah 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 online and they're exaggerating and they got this huge persona, and you pointed that out as a problem, but you clearly just said that you're doing that yourself. So if you could just clarify that.
Oh, certainly. Well, like my whole thing is like, to me, when I engage online, I try to engage at the level that people engage me at. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, like a lot of times, you get people where I'm like, oh, I think perhaps maybe we should approach this problem or look at this problem in a different way, or this is a real issue with society. And people are like, oh, go fuck yourself, communist. And then it's like, oh, well, gulag meme for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, that's not a fair discussion. But at the same time, the people I'm talking about are doing it on Patreon. Like, I'm not on Facebook trying to get like money. I'm not trying to get like pay. I'm just trying to get like cash every month. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to do it for extra clicks. I'm just out there trying to represent what I personally believe.
Okay. So, I'm going to fire off the first question then. So,
well, I have something real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
Me cutting in.
Yeah,
Aren't you concerned that that'll just cause some kind of like race to the bottom, where like you are legitimizing the more extremist point of view by repeating it, and it makes other people more comfortable to move that direction. And then you're also saying, you know, the tactics that they use, we can also use in return. So like you're also encouraging your enemy to do the same thing. Like, you know, there's studies where if you have 4 people lined up and, you know, and 3 of them are plant and you get them to say, you know, which of these lines are longer, if the first 3 lie about it, the chances of the first person going, you know, the fourth person going along with it is really high. So like when you repeat these noxious ideas, like, you know, you're encouraging other people, you're normalizing them. You know, you're encouraging other people to think that they're gonna like do you think there's any weight to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that entirely. And, you know, that's something I kind of struggle with too, honestly. You know what I mean? Because, like, on one hand, when you're online, you desire to be honest and truthful and, like, lay out your arguments and discuss it for people. But at the same time, there's, like, a whole host of people that are just waiting there to, like, tear you apart for, like, trying to be honest and be a real person. You know, so sometimes you kind of put up defense mechanisms. And, you know, like, everybody's human. You know, so, like, and I'm honestly, like I said in the beginning, like, I'm just out there trying to represent myself. So, you know, like, sometimes I shitpost, you know, like, it's funny.
I shitpost. It's just usually not, like, about genocide, which is your choice, and I get it. And trust me, I shitpost. So not to judge, just interesting choice.
You are the shitpost king.
Well, like, I don't think necessarily I always shitpost about genocide, you know, like, a lot of times I do.
No, not always. I didn't say always, no.
Like, I mean, like, I personally am against genocide. I like to lay that out there. I don't think anybody should be genocided. Like,
Good.
One of the most, I think, like, honestly, for anybody out there who listens ever, this is one recommendation I recommend honestly from my heart. Like, this book I read was called Shake Hands with the Devil. And it's from the perspective, it's like a biographical or autobiographical account.
Yeah, we're Canadian, so yeah, we know.
You guys know all about that, Lieutenant?
Yeah, we're Canadian, so yeah.
Those two are.
Dustin's not, but me and Ed are Canadian. So go ahead and explain it to Dustin though, because he probably doesn't fucking know.
Yeah, so this guy was the lieutenant general. I think he was like the highest ranked general ever to lead like a UN mission from Canada. And he led the Rwandan Rwanda United Nations Aid Mission in Rwanda, UNAMIR. Sorry, I'm a little high. I'm getting cotton mouth right now. But basically, this account's just like talks about like the fruitlessness of trying to prevent a genocide and like how the UN was like, this guy had like no resources. He got fucked over at every turn. Like, it's impossible to describe his like account. And he was the guy who was in charge of this mission. So he was the guy. So like, if you were to be anybody, you would be this guy. Basically, if you could go back in time, like, oh, it was my job to prevent this genocide, you would be him. That would be you.
Okay.
Except his hands were tied, basically. Dustin.
Exactly.
He wasn't allowed to actually engage or physically stop the genocide. He had to try to do it in other ways, and it fucked him up for life, like multiple suicide attempts and all kinds.
It's just the worst story. And like the introduction, like the most powerful part about the book, like Shake Hands with the Devil, was in the introduction. It talks about how he had a ghostwriter, and this ghostwriter, like his first ghostwriter, like halfway through the book, just went home and committed suicide because it was so fucked up. Like his first ghostwriter couldn't finish the book, so he had to have another come in because it's just so fucked up. And that was like what set my perspective for like approaching kind of like a lot of this stuff.
You know, okay.
All right. So Dave had questions.
Yeah. So you basically said that you're what'd you say, like a postmodernist Marxist? Is that what you said? I
would say it's not postmodernist because that's like too like tagline-y. It kind of describes like this weird specific, like I don't believe in anything specific. No. It's post-Marxist thought. So like the foundation. If I could explain it real quick, I'll try to do it.
Go ahead.
Okay, so like Marxism, labor theory of value, critique of capitalism, et cetera, et cetera. So then like all these people come along after him. And, like the most recent ones are dudes like Anwar Sheikh, where he talks.
Stick to Marxism because my question is directed towards Marxism. So just stick with that for now. Okay.
Well, post-Marxism would be like what's after Marx.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, Marx had some ideas, and a lot of his critiques were valid, but a lot of it didn't like line up after time. Like he looked at a certain perspective, he had a certain perspective, and he had certain things that he thought were true. And it's like, okay, some of this is valid, but what can we build off this? And like, I think the most important thing you take away if you read Marx, like Capital, is that he says, this is what I observe in my time. Wherever you are in your time, you have to look and understand what's going on in society and use what tools are available to you. Like he says he won't be able to tell you what you need to do necessarily, but this is what he sees with this. And that's
right.
Like okay.
But the problem with Marx was that he was critiquing capitalism of the 19th century.
Oh,
his
yeah,
critiques
exactly.
pertain specifically to the 19th century.
Exactly.
And Marx also had a dualistic approach to his critique on capitalism. He in fact thought capitalism was probably the best operational motive of the time because it had released and gave freedom from the feudal system of the past. I mean, you have to put Marx in context because his parentage comes from the 18th century during the rise of the French Revolution. So his father and was very influential on him. The idea that Marx is writing for his time is very succinct, but the post-Marxist thought hasn't contributed anything, in my opinion, anything new and vital to his in our modern discourse. There is no international labor movement today that is worth a grain of salt. There is no alternative economic principles since Marx from the left, and that's one of the problems I have with this neo-Marxist thought.
I could see that. I mean, I think one of the big criticisms is like, oh, where are all these big thinkers on the left, etc. But I feel like, like one of my favorite people I like to read is a guy called Michael Roberts, and he's like very clearly, he says he's a Marxist economist, and he's at I don't know what specific university and whatever, but he's very specifically a Marxist economist. And what he does is he looks at both different approaches. Like he looks at like the standard, like Paul Krugman kind of type, like economists that are saying like Keynesian economics and this is the approach we need to take. And then he looks at like what Marxism would say, and he looks at the actual data and what it lays out. And it's kind of like, because like, it's a blog post and it's from like actual economists, so it's a lot to lay out, but I think it's like valid reading for anybody who's interested in this stuff, because it's like, he really does a good job, I personally think, of like breaking down the differences between like what a lot of modern, what I would call kind of like cargo cult economists like lay out versus like what like a lot of more traditional or rationalist like economists like lay out. And when I say cargo cult economist, it's hard for me because like I don't read as much economics as I used to, and like the people I'm thinking about are like Paul Krugman types and stuff, like around 2010 when everybody was like loving these guys and like the New York Times and all this stuff. And about that time I just dropped off the map because I was like, these guys are like full of shit. Because if you look back at like what most modern economists said before the 2007 like financial crash, that tells you everything you need to know about their like economics.
Right, but I mean, you're looking at through a Marxist lens. If you're looking at it through economics through a Marxist lens, and let's just look specifically at the United States, what do you see as the problem with the United States in a capitalist system? Like, I just want to focus in on the capitalist system of the United States.
That's fair. Let's talk about like particular problems that maybe I observed that I think could be better. So in particular, like 2007, we had the financial crisis. That was a major issue, and like if we trace the history of that, we see like 1994, like Senate repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, which prevented banks from investing in private and like your funds in like basically private industries. This led to all this speculation, et cetera, financial crisis. And they introduced this Dodd-Frank one. Since 2007, like 100% of real growth in earnings have gone to the top 10% of earners. And this is like a consistent like statistic that people bring up, and what that means is like for most of Americans, they're sitting at the essentially the same amount of money they're making as like 1960s, 1950s.
Yeah. Can I interject here?
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you understand that that's actual government policy that's driving that it's not, because like, so we have a capitalist economy in Canada, but we have regulations against what happened with you guys in the housing crash. Like, you can't just give anybody a loan, or you can't like Shylock them into getting a loan. It's actually hard to get a mortgage here, so you can't just fucking shiest people into whatever you want. The other thing is too is that banks can't invest they can't like how in the US the banks can have your money in there and then they can do like high risk maneuvers with your money, like you guys had in the Great Depression when the banks were taking the money and putting it out onto Wall Street, and then the stock market crashed. So it's not capitalism itself that's the problem. It's the government's recklessness that is the problem. And you have the same problem, and even worse, with communism. Because when the communist economy crashes, you end up with breadlines and like, so the first thing to go once the communist economy crashes is the stuff that you don't need, right? And everybody can live with the stuff that they don't really need. But once you get down into your base needs and those things start going away, and you don't have any trading partners, and you don't have any way of infusing more money into the economy, because your economy is based on the workers, but there's no work for the workers, it ends up being worse of a crash for the communist system than it does for the capitalist system, which can bounce back with the proper government regulations.
Well, before we hop on to communism, because I feel like we'll probably talk about that forever. We can talk about that probably for hours. Let's continue. I feel like we should like finish up with like the last little bit about like the separation of like the government from the idea of capitalism. Like, you can't separate the two.
Yeah, you can.
Because then otherwise you can't say that was not real communism. Well, that was just the government acting up.
No, that's not the case. So you're misunderstanding my point. Okay.
I mean, is that not fair? What do you guys think?
No, that's not a fair assessment of what I just said.
Because, I mean, ask yourself, okay, like here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to back it up with some data. So like Stanford, I think, recently did a study on like the government of like the United States, and they looked at public policy decisions by the government over the past 50 years. Okay. So, and they compare that against polls from the general public, all Americans, wealthy Americans, and special business interests. And they found that 100% of like decisions made were in favor of wealthy Americans or business interest. So if 100% of decisions made are in favor of wealthy Americans,
but that's your government
or business
that's
interest,
that.
Is that not capitalism governing the system?
That's your government doing that. Okay, so
exactly.
so hang on.
Separate the two to me.
Okay, in your country, but
yeah, in my country.
Okay, but take a social democracy. Okay.
Sure. It's like a better government system. It has more representation from the people. We don't have representation.
But it has a capitalist economy. It doesn't have a socialist economy. That's the problem.
Yeah, you can have private enterprise. You can own businesses.
Yes, and you have a right to private property. That's the problem with I find with a lot of Marxists or socialists. They like to try to say that the Nordic countries are democratic socialist countries or socialist countries. Iceland.
No, they're not. They're capitalist countries.
They're capitalist countries. Even
you guys can't keep talking over each other. Like you know, one at a time. Like know. So Kyle.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead, Kyle.
So yeah, all those countries are obviously capitalist. Like, you know, like I'm a very traditionalist guy. I understand like the rules of private property versus personal property and all those distinctions. I read the theory. I'm not some like random internet guy trying to get clicks, is my point. You know, like if you have like specific criticisms you want to level and like discuss, like let's discuss those rather than like it's kind of like broad claims about like.
No, what do you mean broad claims?
Well, it's like when we look at the failures of like the USSR in particular and breadlines.
It's not just USSR. It's okay. So here, and if I'm being forceful, I apologize. Okay,
yeah,
look.
I'm the same way. Sorry, you guys. I'm like, it's just us two talking now. I feel like I'm not letting anybody interject. I'm down. I'm relaxing. I wish I had my webcam so you guys could.
It can get as heated as you want to get heated. Just if you're talking over each other, listeners can't tell what's going on. That's my concern. Go ahead, guys.
Okay, look. What I'm saying is the capitalist system in the United States runs out of control because of government policy. Okay? Now you can say that those those policies and those politicians are capitalists and that they're doing it to benefit themselves. And I would agree with you if you say that. But what you can't say is that capitalism doesn't work with restrictions and policies better than any socialist economy that's ever existed on the planet ever. There's no comparison.
Okay. I think honestly, if we look at the top two competitors with the United States, what two superpowers are competitors with the United States? Russia and China.
Neither of which are socialist economies.
But the point is like Russia used to be run by a bunch of fucking peasants and like feudal assholes. In 100 years, they had nuclear weapons and were like threatening the world power. That's what communism does.
Hold on. Now it's ran by a very capitalist right-wing authoritarian. Like, so, at that time, actually, like, while they seemed to be a great, competition, their people were starving. But like Dave said, it's not just Russia. It's also under, Mao's Cultural Revolution. It's also in Cuba during their revolutions with the very catchy, Che Guevara T-shirts. It's also in Venezuela right now. It's actually every time. It's every time. So like, that's really the important claim you got. There's 150 million, dead under various communist regimes. So it's like. We are not zooming in on the USSR. Actually, we would be very foolish to zoom in on the USSR. We're talking about the whole idea.
But I will zoom in on something.
Ed has something that he has to say, and he's been very quiet. So,
well, I mean, when you think about capitalist and you're looking through a Marxist lens, you're thinking about 19th century capitalism. Capitalism right now in a social democracy works much more efficiently, especially with the safety nets and availability of upward migration, whereas 19th century capitalism had no upward mobility, and nor did it have any of the safety nets that modern day capitalism has. Secondly, when you look at a place like China, it would have been disaster if it stayed into a purely socialist economy. The only reason why China is even a competitor in modern day economics is because of the fact that it borders capitalism. It uses capitalism as its economy, but communism as its governmental structure. Those are two competing approaches, but they've amalgamated them together so that they can actually have a thriving economy.
It also steals the sorry to cut in, and I'm gonna let you go again. It also steals the innovation from capitalist countries. Like it ignores our copyright laws, and that is the great downfall of socialism. Is like or communism is if there's no great incentives to create the next great thing and the next great product and the next great idea. Why would you? So they don't have the incentive within their own country, so they still are incentives so they can compete with us. But go ahead with your thought, Ed. Sorry.
And the third point I'd like to bring up when it comes to capitalism in and of itself is the fact that the opportunity for upward migration is tremendous. And work ethic is the main focus of that. One of the major problems Marx had with 19th century capitalism was the fact that there was no upward migration, that the workers had no control over their economics. Unlike modern capitalists in many other countries outside the U.S. and even in the United States, is that the upward migration is a critical key that will change from a lower poor class to a multimillionaire overnight. That is a definitive difference between capitalism of the 19th century and modern capitalism. Second, finally, if you just talk about the 1%, let's you have to break that down too. I mean, how many people in the United States are in abject poverty compared to, say, a socialist Russia, where people were dying in the streets by the millions just for sheer neglect? And there is a wide difference. Yes, there's inequality among capitalism, but if a person is able to and willing to want to strive to better themselves through education, through upward migration within positions, or to start their own business, they're able to do so. Not within the communist system. It has never been part of this communist system to ever allow a person to choose what position that they would be in. They were supposed to, if you go to school for 12 years and become a doctor, you still have the same pay as someone that is in that never went to university or did any betterment of themselves, and just said fuck it and basically took out trash for their life. That is as Dave had put it out, and Dustin mentioned, it also limits the morale of the people to want to have the incentive or the initiative to move up in society. And then I'll stop there.
So I think that brought up like everything, every argument ever that existed against like communism. So I'll try and like,
not really, but go ahead.
I think I'll try and like collect it into like 3 or 4 major points, you know. So like we had one, human nature, you know, people have like human mobility in capitalism. I think that was one of the major points, was the mobility. 2 was like, people were like starving in the streets in like socialist countries and like all this terrible stuff. I don't remember your first 2 points.
The fact that modern socialist countries like China, who actually and Russia, that were formerly strictly socialist, have now adopted capitalist policies and actually economies to survive. They may run their governments as a socialist, but not their economies.
Okay. So I think that can be answered up by like calling back to a previous point I brought up, as well as calling back to Marx himself and like his major work, which is Capital. You know, and if anybody's read Capital, you know that what does he talk about? Commodity-backed economies. Is America a commodity-backed economy? No, absolutely not. We have fiat currency. And Marx was writing about fiat currency in volume 3, which he died before he finished. So we never knew his full thoughts on the structure of this economy, which is why I call myself a post-Marxist, because we have more modern economists that use empirical data to create far better models for understanding economic activity than
And can you name me a country that actually utilizes this post-Marxist philosophy?
No. Like, we have failures all over the place. Like, if you want to talk about Venezuela, what was Venezuela's issue? They had a revolution. They took a bunch of oil. They had all this money, and they squandered it. And then what happens when the oil runs up? When the money dries up? Your shit goes to shit. It's a failed revolution. You know, they fucked up. Sometimes that happens. That's what happens when you have fucking revolutions.
It seems every time that happens.
People are like being killed by the government there, and there's no denying that, right? Like, they've turned into an authoritarian.
Yeah, they're an
government.
autocratic state, and in the last year they've developed into a military dictatorship. It's a failed revolution, you know, in the most basic sense of the word. Like, it's become the worst thing that could happen.
Okay, so I just want to interject real quick. Dustin, you said that we weren't going to go after the USSR, but I'm going to go right at that. So Kyle, you said that in 100 years they went from peasants to having nuclear power, right? Yeah.
Some terrors in the process.
But they did it by murder, right?
Yeah.
So that's not a thriving. That's not a. Hang on. The United States didn't do that. I'm not arguing for the United States. I've already made my point on the United States. And don't interrupt, right? So I'm going to talk, then you talk. Right. Yeah. Okay. But so after they got to that point, the reason why they turned into a democracy is because it failed. right? Like every single fucking time it fails. They couldn't survive the way that they were going, and that's why they had to turn to a democracy, and that's why they had to turn to capitalism, because the communist system had failed.
But the capitalist system there isn't a democracy.
Okay. When they first turned over, they were a democracy. When they first turned over, they were. Now that Putin's running shit, obviously they're not a true democracy anymore. They're a fake democracy.
I would argue very strongly that in the collapsing years of the USSR, at no point was it ever a democracy. It was always being looted and like taken advantage of in those stages. There was corruption abroad. Everything was fucked up. People were starving. You guys aren't going to disagree with me there, are you?
No, but I have a question here. Like, how many times do countries have to try to work out Marx's ideas, through communist regimes, and it lead to genocide and starvation, for you to say, like, maybe there's not a way to do this?
It's not easy to decide, because like when we talk about
no, you're supporting it, so it is for you to decide whether or not you support it. Like, at what point?
I support it personally, yeah, but do you?
Do Marxist ideas? No, I believe in a mixed economy that is basically capitalist. I believe that capitalism is heartless, and that you should use socialist programs to soften the heartlessness of it, and to help propel people into the upper classes that capitalism creates. I think that the hierarchy is actually extremely important. I believe that a mostly self-regulated market is actually pretty important. Deciding what prices are is actually very, very motherfucking complex. No, I think the ideas are actually fundamentally flawed, and that's why every time you have a class economy, I think that you have to have a strong man on top to control everything, because it's ultimate government control over everything, to get there, It has to, I'm sorry, Ed, one more thing, like, it has to be achieved at the end of a gun. Like, how else do you equalize everything? It has to be achieved at the end of a gun. And that is why every time someone tries to achieve it, they bring their guns. Go ahead, Ed.
I remember in Das Kapital, where Marx argues that capitalism will necessarily lead to socialism. That has not borne out at all. Socialism actually has to give way to capitalism. Capitalism will always outcompete socialism due to the simple facts of inherent problems within the system. When you have a dictatorial system based on the fact that you're trying to collectivize people into a single unit and dehumanize them basically in that process by saying that there is nothing unique about the individual, that's where the problem with communism starts. The individual is the order of freedom. It is where Marx was correct in some respects. Marx was correct in the fact that saying that the individual is the important one. It's when you start collectivizing under the socialist system and making the individual obsolete and the group the main body, that is where you get the problems. And I think the time after time, in country after country, from China to Russia to Venezuela and Cuba, Pol Pot's Cambodia, you see massive genocide because people kick against their basic instinct. In fact, that they want to be autonomous human beings. And that is something that has to be taken into account, that when you take advantage by the gun into a collective identity, that's when you run into problems.
Well, I think there's like a lot of like personally criticisms with that idea, because I think like when we're talking about the individual, you know what I mean? What do we want from each individual?
The individual is the basic unit of all society. Society itself is a fragmentation.
Of course. But what do we want from an individual?
We want an individual to maximize their potential.
Exactly.
Is what we want. And you're not going to do that if there's not incentive. Like, here's the thing, man. Like, I spent 10 hours today working in the Alabama summer, and then I came home and prepared to do a podcast in my spare time. I deserve more than someone that spent all day sitting at home smoking weed and playing Xbox. Like, I deserve it. And here's the thing, man. If I'm not going to get more than that guy sitting at home playing Xbox and smoking weed, I'm not going to fucking work as hard. You know why? Because fuck you. And like that's just being honest, that's human nature. And like that's the old joke was in the Soviet Union and in a lot of communist regimes, I would assume they pretend to pay us so we pretend to work. So, you know, like why, you know, and we make zero money on this show. We pay money to make this show because it's a passion of ours. But if I could make a great deal of money and invest my time, like that gives me the incentive to invest more and more time in this show. And a way to measure whether or not we're making something successful is whether or not people are willing to give us money. If people decide to take the money that they have earned and they give it to us, then that shows that this is something we are succeeding at and we should put more into it. And the more we succeed and the more people give us, that is a greater product being produced. How do you do that under communism? Unless it just has to be like, just for the state and just because I want to. Like, here's like under communist regime, no matter how good I am at this podcast, I'm going to have to spend 10 hours in Alabama summer fucking working because I have to, you know, fill up my dues. Like, so there's no, like, how do I find that thing that I'm great at? And how is that recognized? And how is that rewarded?
So, like, I think there's, like, a lot to be said for, like, this idea of human nature, but I want to try and, like, take a second to kind of, like, condense it into, like, a more pure thought rather than just ramble on and on. So, like, essentially, you know, like, when we talk about like what it means to work in like human potential and human actualization, self-actualization, right? You know, like we want people to work, everybody wants to work, you know, and in communism or in socialism, you know, like let's not even say necessarily communism, because I'm not even going to necessarily argue that I'm in favor of USSR style or Chinese style or Cuban style like communism. You know what I mean? Like I personally see Marxism as a critique of capitalism. And so what I see it as is like, what's the problems and what can we do to fix them? And how can we like work together to fix them? Because I'm only one person. You know, like at the end of the day, if I can't bring you guys on to like work together on these issues that I find as serious issues with society, then it's like, oh, well, it's like, well, I guess I'll just have to like keep working at it and trying to like do the best I can with my limited time. Like you guys do your podcast with your limited time to create like this sense or these values or like whatever you want to produce. So too do I like spend my limited time doing things. So let's kind of talk about now like what we want to do with our time. So like I have a job, a 9 to 5, right? Like 40 hours a week, right? And I have it in LA. So I take the bus there and back. It takes an hour and a half to go about 20 miles, FYI, over the 405 in LA traffic. And so I sit there and I write a book. And I hope one day it'll like become successful. And that's like using my time efficiently, you know. And I guess people would say like, some people would say like, oh, you're just being a good capitalist. But I say, no. I'm being a good Marxist, because the foundation of Marxism is labor, right? And so if you build,
but if you say that labor, you know, Marx. The problem with it is theoretically Marx's ideas sound justifiable until they actually are put into practice. It's like in any scientific method, when you can have a great hypothesis as long as until it's actually explored and actually put into practice and a test done on it, it's meaningless. So when you put Marx's principles, even if you don't go to communism, they never work. It's the combination between Marxist or socialist principles and capitalist economy that actually meld together, and you get great countries like, let's look at Iceland, for instance, a small country. It's a social democracy that runs on a social capitalist economy. It is, or what they call the Nordic economy. It's doing really well for its size, and it's because of the mixture of both capitalism and socialism. And that is the key, is not that one size fits all. It's the hypothesis that has been tested and it has been found to work. And and that's the only way. I mean, I think in terms of the scientific method as well. And that's how I judge everything. So what I would be willing to suggest here is that for me, a social capitalist system is a much more practical and much more usable thing because it has been proven to do so, not because it theoretically sounds good.
Yeah, and for me, the social democracy is the most superior system. I live basically under social democracy. We exchange ruling parties, come and go, but basically the system in Canada is regulated capitalist economy with a wide social umbrella, wide welfare umbrella, and I'm perfectly okay with that. I do have a question about labor for you though.
Can I respond kind of first?
Yeah. So go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, first. So, I mean, I know Ed's not here anymore, but I just kind of wanted to say, like, when we're both scientific method people, so like when we look at what's happened to these different like socialist countries like China, all these things, especially China, I think China is like a really good example because with such a huge system, we see both the immediate failures of certain like programs, like the Cultural Revolution, I guess you could say. There's everything has to be considered in its own like time and shit, you know what I mean?
Because, and the failure of their censorship too, really, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, like, and then if you look at it today, where like people say it's capitalist, but what's going on is there's very specific government programs. It's run by communism. Yes. I think that was Ed was saying, or is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying like both Ed and I agree on this that the government is communist. The economy is partial capitalist. So I would say that. So I would say that the government probably owns 25% of most of the businesses that are in China.
I would think a good way to think about it is like when you run a business in China, you don't buy the business, you lease it. So even if it's a 50-year lease that you own the land on the business, it's a 50-year lease from the government.
That harkens back to the private thing that I brought up earlier, right? So like your private property, so like your home, your business. You know what I mean?
Like, it's still run by a communist government, and I think that's like a hard thing for people that are like, look, they're capitalists to understand. It's like
hang on.
No. It's
hang
still
on,
a communist government.
hang on. So even if the communist government is taking tithes from those businesses and telling them, the capitalist government is playing inside a capitalist system. Like there's people getting rich in China. Don't kid yourself. Don't think that it's
I'm not saying that. No.
Yeah.
Oh, of course not. Absolutely, and that's a real problem. Like if you look at actual recent things that the president was saying, I want to say
rich is a problem.
No. Listen. You have to.
I know. I was dying off mic too, dude. I was.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Last year, I think like June, like their president was saying, "Oh, we need to return to our Marxist roots," and he's like, this is a theory of mine, so hear me out. It's just a theory. This is all opinion. But I basically...
hold on, real quick. What a relief. I really hope they chased down their Marxist roots because they were becoming... They were almost competition.
No, they are competition. They say like...
Reports,
repeat. Most of the world's growth in the last like few quarters has been because of China's like manufacturing growth and just production.
Slave wages. Be real. Go ahead, Dustin.
Whatever. China's a fucking communist country. They use wage labor. And the difference is between America and China is like when you do slave labor, you still get a fucking place to sleep.
Just nice enough to jump out of the window, right? No, wait, they have nets now.
Okay, hold up.
Nice.
I'm sorry. You get a home that you can't even commit suicide in. Oh, what a lovely accommodation! Like
sounds like America. You're dying on the streets, they pick you up, give you
$20,000
in debt.
Okay, hold up. But how about this? The United States, in their manufacturing processes, have strict regulation on the types of products being used, on the environmental impact that it can have. It also has strict guidelines on what materials can be allowed out to the public. China has none of those. They also infringe on human rights, basic human rights. And
I don't believe in none of that.
You don't
Pardon?
believe that they do? You don't
No,
believe
they don't
do that?
believe in none of that. You ever hear of the Lao guy?
Right. So if they so you're telling me that a socialist economy, a socialist government is better for a society when it strips not only the individual but society as a whole of its basic human rights. That juxtaposition to me is very, very flawed. It has no relationship to what I deem as a scientific or even a humanistic credence.
It's scientific as fuck.
It's not scientific as fuck. It can't be. The scientific, to me, human well-being is science.
Gargantuan.
Okay, hang on.
Hold on.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry.
Yeah.
You keep calling on science, and you call yourself a scientist. Like, what is your practice? Like, what is your connection to science? Are you a science enthusiast? Are you an actual scientist? Are you like Bill Nye, the science guy? Will you have an engineering degree?
I have
Would
a
you really
degree in
dig science?
biochemistry. I have a degree in biochemistry.
A PhD or a BA?
Yes, and I manage like a research lab. I work with science all day. I'm a scientist.
Okay.
So
just curious.
What is the scientific, in your opinion, what is the scientific merits of a forced labor economy where humans have no expectation to life or liberty, where one of the things that Marx stressed in Das Kapital was that the human being was the essential person. He wanted autonomy not only for the individual person, but for the material which they produced, or what he called capital, the inherent capital, which is part of who they are, their own individuality. That is something that Marx stressed very strongly in Das Kapital, in the Communist Manifesto, and in every work he's ever produced. Marx was very, very important in my growth when it came to the importance of the individual. And I fail to see how a neo-Marxist can say that a forced labor economy where a person has no individual rights is scientifically better and is better for the individual and better for the society as a whole. I have no understanding.
No. Not better for the individual at all. Absolutely not. But when we look at like what China's done as a communist entity from the Cultural Revolution to today, that is application of Marxism as science each step of the way. Economic plans 1 through 13. You know what I mean?
But they failed every time. It wasn't until the adoption of capitalism.
That's economic plans 1 through 13. They had changed and adapted. That's science.
Yeah, but
test the theory, change it.
You're criticizing capitalism at the same time, but then you're giving credence to China for implementing it and you can say
Absolutely.
that. So for implementing it. So are you admitting that capitalism is a superior system, or?
No, it's not about whether or not it's a superior system. It's about what works to create what results. You guys yourself are arguing that China's most recent system dehumanizes people with the introduction.
No. China, it's the social, it's the
Is that not what you were just
saying?
saying?
No, I'm saying forced labor economy, which is not.
China's not a forced labor economy where you're not saying people were forced to work, can't even leave their homes?
Based on the socialist government, not based on the capitalist system that it employs. United States is not, for instance, is a capitalist country, same way as Canada. There is no forced labor economy.
Absolutely not.
So you cannot say that. Hold on. You cannot say the United States capitalism is a forced labor economy at all. You can't say that. It doesn't bear out in the evidence. It doesn't bear out in practice. When you adopt socialist ideology and you transpose it over a capitalist system like China has, it necessarily, by definition, leads to forced labor and forced economies.
Go ahead.
Right. It's an authoritarian means of doing the economy, and capitalism is by nature a voluntary exchange between two individuals, which is the opposite. That is a libertarian, that is liberty, freedom based economy. I have something like I need money, you have something that you need to be done, I show up and do that thing, you give me the money, right? It's not perfect, and no one's saying it's perfect, but like that is not that's not forced labor. So like the forced labor is the socialist economy, right? Like it's right in the mantra of from each according to their ability. That's not if you want. To each according to their need, which is according to who? The government.
I think Ed will agree with me when I say this. When we talk about what Marx says in regards to like the individual and their labor and the product of their labor, right? When we talk about like what it is to have a forced labor economy, if we look back 100 years to when Marx was writing about capitalism, we had people working 14-hour days, 7 days a week, and nobody had the opportunity to move up.
But that's not the case anymore.
That's not the case today. No, of course not. No. But when we look at China implementing capitalism, it's a harken back to like the olden days. And it grew capitalism to the point where individuals had their particular freedoms that they want.
So their progress is to become a democracy and a capitalist system. Hang on. I want to address both of you guys on Marx, like both Ed and Kyle. So both of you have been talking about the individual, right? When it comes to Marx, he said that it's a revolution by any means necessary, and that the workers are going to overthrow the rich people, and that basically you're going to have dictatorship for a little bit of time until people are educated, and then you can have a governance.
That's a Communist Manifesto, yes.
Yes. So how?
That's not Das Kapital, though.
Interrupt me one more time, man. Let me get my fucking point out, okay? Look, how is he for the individual when he's for killing people? Because that's basically what happened, right? So, and it wasn't just like the rich people themselves. It was the children of the rich people and the people that work for them in Russia. So how is that? And that's to both Ed and Kyle.
Ask yourself how it got so bad.
Okay.
People were killing.
Okay, hold up.
People and their children.
Yeah, hold up.
That's a historical question, bro.
Yeah, but Marx's opinion on this was simple. Marx believed that in a democratic system, that capitalism would automatically lead to socialism. There would be no violent overthrow. He believed in countries that were so encrusted with aristocracy that the peasantry, and he didn't even talk about peasantry, he talked about the proletariat, which is the middle class. The middle class would come up and revolt against the aristocracy and would have to do so probably violently, which exactly what happened.
See, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, hold up. But he said, but he never ever dreamed that it would ever take place in Russia, because Russia was back.
Does it matter where it takes place, though, Ed?
No, I'm not justifying.
If political violence takes place, it doesn't matter which country it's in, right?
No, and I'm not justifying.
And to call for a dictatorship, what guy in his right mind, once he becomes the dictator, is going to give up? Absolute power corrupts absolute.
Of course, and I'm not justifying. I'm just saying this is what Marx said. Marx also was bastardized when it came to Lenin, but that has nothing to do with the fact that the principles that were in place were worse off after the revolution than they were before the revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Marx's idea of the proletariat uprising and overthrowing the bourgeoisie, when it took place in Russia, although in the aristocracy there was a peasant class that was very poor and very, that didn't change with the revolution. In fact, it got worse. And collectivized farming made it even worse, because what it did was they killed the aristocracy and landowners in that area, and people were actually starving in the tens of millions instead of just in the thousands. Not that it was any that was a good thing. It just, I mean, like under the aristocracy, is the idea that Marxism or communism in Russia changed anything. No, it didn't. It made it worse, and it made a bigger elitist class under the dictatorship, and then everybody was turned into an agent of that to rat on their owner or their neighbor, their other.
Okay, I'll readdress my question to you, Ed, and then I'm going to let Kyle answer it, and then we're going to move on to more modern topics like what's going on in the U.S. with Antifa and the alt-right and shit like that. Okay, how can you be for the individual when you call for violence upon the individual? Why does the peasant have more right to life than the rich person, or the rich person have more right to life than the peasant?
This is where Marx and I disagree tremendously. Marx stated he was for the individual. The idea that the proletariat was something better than the peasantry, and was better than the aristocracy or the bourgeoisie was mistaken. It's wrong. The idea that the individual, he went past the individual and decided to go to the collectivization. Once you go to the collectivization and dehumanize people, it's easier to think in terms of genocidal terms.
Of course. Polarization, dehumanization. Yeah.
And we talked about this before.
Go ahead, Kyle. Answer your question if you remember it.
So personally, I don't think that violence against the individual is no longer necessary in like any revolutionary sense. Like, that's my beliefs. You know, I don't know if all communist types will agree with me, but I think with the advent of modern technology, there's a lot of steps that we could bypass to achieve like our goals. So like, I don't agree that in the historical context, we look and we see what happened and we're like, whoa, shit was fucked up. That was fucked up. Yeah. They fucking rose up and they murdered the fuck out of millions of people. That's what happened. That's a revolution. That's what happens. But am I calling for that necessarily? No. I think there's better tools and better ways. And I still think they can achieve the same end goal.
What is the end goal?
In a sense, you know, man has the product of his own labor.
Right. And does he not under the capitalist system?
Absolutely not.
How? When I can choose what job I can pick, when I can do it, how much education I need to get to that movement, to start a new position. Yes, that didn't happen in Marxist lifetime. You were quite correct. Under the capitalist system of the 19th century, there was no that Marx was correct that there was humans or the proletariat didn't have the right to their own work. That's not the same today. So the end goal is this equality that you've been talking about before. It's that everybody should have an equal chunk of things. Well, that's just not the way human beings are in nature. Human beings are faster, tougher. Some are slower, weaker. Some are stupid. Some are smart. Some are brilliant. Some are fat. Some are skinny. Some are white. Some are black. Some are Hispanic. Some are what? There's diversity in every human being. So just to have this blanket equality where everybody gets a set wage, where everybody gets a set living is insurmountably wrong. It cannot happen that way because there are people that are variations that would variate or would diverge from that opinion. They would, and there would all be a constant revolution. So that's it.
Hang on, but fair wages for everybody. But let's be real. Let's be realistic here, and I'll be upfront. I don't come from fuck all. I grew up in a fucking shitty hotel room with a prostitute sister who was murdered when I was 16. I sold crack. I rose up from that. I now have my own business. Okay. I did that on my own. I pay the people that work for me fairly. I don't chintz people. I treat my customers fairly. Within the communist system, I don't like it, and I can't say 100% because I haven't lived in a communist system. I will agree with you on that, but I just don't see how somebody like me could lift themselves out of poverty to the middle class within a communist system. Because if like, so just say you have like 500 positions for doctors in the communist system, not everybody's going to get to be a doctor. But what if everybody wants to be a doctor?
Well, the issue here becomes then, and what really emerged in the Soviet Union was that they selected people for positions. Whether you wanted to be that position or not, this is what you would become. And this is where your direction of education would go, because they needed various people into various disciplines. That's just the way it happened. And that is not, again, not allowing the freedom of the individual nor the entire middle class, which ceased to exist after communism.
But I can't necessarily say that I mean, that was shitty too, and I agree with that was being shitty. I think there was times when it wasn't so shitty, like, because like with all like nations, if you look at different times, things were different, right? So if we look at like immediately after revolution from like 1923 to 1932, right? Like what you have is a nation state that in the time of like endemic capitalist exploitation had free education, free housing, free healthcare, free food, and they actually provided it and built a system to provide it. Now what happened afterwards was a collapse of that.
Let's examine that for a second first. I have to, like, you just can't say that they gave them free education. What kind of education were they available to them? And who was not in any other on the level of any other country in the world? That is blatantly a mistake.
Which country is this?
This is talking about Russia.
Oh,
Russia
okay.
Russia's education system was mediocre at best back during the Russian Revolution. Second, the food that they were given to people was minuscule at best. Many more people starved under the from the Russian Revolution till 1932 than they did under any czar.
I just want to say this before I go to the washroom. We're having free college where I live in October, and it's a capitalist economy. I'll be right back.
Yeah, let's break.
I mean, and like I want to throw you a bone real quick too, man. Like I say this, like thank God we live in a capitalist country. You said you do what again? You manage a lab?
Yeah.
Okay, so like you provide more worth to society during your day job than I do, and you should be rewarded for that, and you're paid more, and that is justice.
You'd be surprised, probably, actually.
Oh, I fucking doubt it, son.
Really that hard?
Okay. Like you were like, let's get in a poor argument. Let's get a poor argument.
No,
like I'll fight you. No, I'm from the ghettos of Birmingham. Let's do this. No, that's and you know, like Dave creates very aesthetic and durable and well-made shelter in Canada, and let's say that's quite important.
Yeah.
It keeps it from all dying. You know, I don't talk about my job specifically, but it's low skill. I could do better. You know, and it motivates me to do better in life, to do something of greater worth.
Yeah.
You know, you get it. Like I could be very complacent and just do what I'm doing now forever.
Yeah.
I just okay. You're back. Okay. So like, what is the motivation in a communist system? Like, how do you know when you found something that you're really good at if there's not a measure of success from the general public? Like, I don't like educate me while the guys are taking a piss.
Yeah. So before they come back and yell at us both for like hours. Okay. Basically, real quick, man. Like, my thing is like I said, I'm post-Marxist, so I look at what works for America. You know, like in America, it's shitty. You know, like most people have it pretty shitty.
Is it?
Like, it's shitty. It's pretty shitty.
Is it? No, hold on. Let's like I want to address that statement right there, because like once again, okay, quick. You don't know me. I am mixed. my parents lost custody of me and my brother when I was 2 and he was 4. My mother was a heroin addict. She was later a prostitute. Hold on. I've been a heroin addict myself. In the last year and a half in Alabama, one of the poorest states in the country, I graduated from a high school with a degree that is worth shit because it was a Christian school that was unaccredited. Okay. My teachers didn't go to college. Hold on. I have went from sleeping on my buddy's couch and all of my belongings fitting in the closet to I have I'm splitting a nice house with a guy where I have a bed. I just bought a 2010 Mini Cooper. I walked for 2 years to get to work, 3.5 years. 3.5 miles. And it was a struggle, but there was a path up and it wasn't actually that hard. If you work and you don't make terrible decisions, even in a poor country with low education and a lot of personal problems, you can lift yourself up in America. There's a reason why we have to consider if too many people are forcing their way into our country. That's not a problem in China. Everyone's not fighting to get in. You still said is America so bad? You made it
I was talking
you made this
more
statement
on,
that America is shitty. The entire on some people, for some people that lose the game in a capitalist system, it is shitty, and there should be strong socialist programs for them. I agree with you there. But actually, America, being the most capitalist, one of the most capitalist countries in the world, has made it one of the most desirable places in the world to live. People want to come and be a minority in America. In countries that have economies like ours. People don't want to go and be a minority in China. People don't want to go to be a minority in any of these authoritarian countries. None of them. People want to come to capitalist countries to be a minority. Because if you're fucking good at what you do, you can win.
Which capitalist?
And win in fucking most of them.
Which countries?
Where are all? Hold on. Let me
on the planet.
Let me answer your question. Which countries?
All
the countries. Hold on. All of the countries with a migrant crisis right now are capitalist countries. All of them.
Which ones?
From the UK to
all of Europe, the North America, there's very few. There's 5 communist countries right now.
Yeah.
Do I need to Google and name off the 5
Cuba,
communist countries?
China, Seychelles, and
which one are thriving metropolises of freedom?
Seychelles. Seychelles is chilling. Cuba's all right. I'd rather live in Cuba than Haiti.
Would you?
There's
And how many people would have fled Cuba?
Hey, hang on.
During the revolution,
you're comparing Cuba to the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. You'd rather live in Cuba than...
They're both in the same land area. They're both small island nations.
Okay, so
can't compare Cuba to America. America's a huge fucking landmass with 330 million people.
I'd rather live in
America
Newfoundland.
to Iceland.
I'd rather live in Newfoundland, which is a small island off the coast of Canada, which has probably the worst economic conditions in all of Canada. Then in Cuba.
It's where he lives. That's the secret. That's where he lives.
That's why I say that.
I'm really interested in this. I've never heard about Newfoundland. I've only there's dog breed that's super big and fat from there. That's awesome.
And Labrador Retriever is part of our.
Go ahead.
Anyway,
he wants to know where Newfoundland is and what it's about, Ed. So go ahead.
Newfoundland is off the east coast. It's in Canada. We were once our own country, but we joined Canada in 1949. We are probably economically the worst province in the country, but I still would rather live every day here than in Cuba. I'd say my economy is much better in Newfoundland than it is in.
Okay, but he's saying a small island. It's the size of Texas.
Well, true.
Well, hold on. I think I have a good argument. There are some countries that are shining beacons of prosperity that are in the middle of areas that are not so prosperous, and specifically through the South Pacific, and they're almost to a T places that were colonies and have very strong capitalist bends right now. When you look at North Korea to South Korea, South Korea is one of the richest countries, and Japan, they're very wealthy, and they're very forward to,
South
like
Korea has planned
progressive.
economies, though.
Planned economies
Yeah, like
is
5-year
is
plans.
not the same as forced labor.
No, I'm not talking about forced labor. I'm talking about 5-year plans.
Are you really trying to say that are you really
North Korea is better?
No, I'm not saying North Korea is better. I'm saying South Korea had a dictator and 5-year plans. That's all. It wasn't a true capitalist system. It was authoritarian to a T.
But it's not right now authoritarian.
No, not now. But so what? Russia's a shithole, but I mean, these are all their individual cases. It's just things I understand about them. What does that mean about South Korea?
Hold on,
Okay,
did you just
never?
You just called Russia a shithole like that? Hold on, you were just defending Russia early in the show, and now you're saying it's a shithole because what?
Because it's all
they're doing better than they've ever. They're doing better than they've ever done under capitalism. Like yes, they have some authoritarian problems in their leadership that they need to take care of, but the economy is capitalist, and that's what's actually made them stronger than they've ever been. But Ed had something to say.
No, I'm just trying to explain that. Okay, so South Korea had a dictator, but it used a capitalist system and is thriving. Look at North Korea, who has a dictator and a socialist system, and it is in
Why would go
poverty.
beyond socialist? That's like strict communism.
Yeah, but
I mean, North Korea is fucked up. First of all,
but everywhere that socialism, strict socialism, actually is implemented, it has always led to the people that it's supposed to have protected to be abused, disillusioned, and dehumanized, and literally starved to death. This is the difference between a communist system and a capitalist system is blatantly clear that capitalism wins out. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. There are absolutely problems with a capitalist system, but they can be mitigated by implementing portions of a social networking system.
Which is government policy.
Yeah, and that comes down to, like, Canada and Great Britain, for instance, have a socialized medicine. Same with Norway and Sweden and others. They're thriving beyond anybody's expectations for the size of the countries that they belong to. The idea that a capitalist system is bad for society has no demonstrable evidence whatsoever. None. Zero. Zilch. Nada. There are problems, and I'll be the first to admit it, but I've never seen a society built on socialism that has ever thrived. Name me one, and I would be happy.
Well, name me the successes of capitalism in South America, in Africa.
In Africa?
Asia, Southeast Asia.
You haven't, okay.
Globally, over the last century, there's been billions lifted out of poverty globally.
Where are most of them come
not just
from?
South America.
Capitalist system.
China.
I'm like
Communist China.
No, none.
No.
Communist China
using capitalist system.
Doesn't matter.
Using capitalist system. No. Hold on. If your argument, which by the way, the meme that got you into this mess is that capitalists have garbage arguments, and I just want to remind you of that statement.
That's fine.
No. Your statement now is that, like, oh, thank God that China embraced capitalist system. Like, if your argument is that sometimes Marxism can lead to capitalist systems with authoritarian regimes is a positive, like what are you saying about you keep toting China, and I don't think that's exactly a success story for communism. It's a success story for capitalism finally fucking breaking through. Thank God an American president showed up and they started embracing capitalist ideas,
controlled.
or the fucking genocide would have continued.
Doesn't matter.
Tightly controlled.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it does.
Yes, and it does matter because it's highly controlled and they lunge themselves from the fucking windows and kill themselves, and we have to build fucking netting around it. Like, yes, it is better when it's not so tightly controlled.
But still.
Yes.
But I mean, what I'm saying to you is, simply put, there is no society that has ever went to a strictly socialist economy / government that actually worked. Never has, never will. Because the inherent problems of socialism is quite self-evident. It's played out its game. It has been over since the 1980s. We've seen it in action. Capitalism.
How would you suggest they solve any particular problem in society?
But we can't blame it on simply on one like say capitalism has a lower class. You can't say that the lower class's problems are based on a capitalist system.
Why not?
Because there's a myriad of other problems built into that inherently. You can
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Hang on, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Okay. So if you really want to stop poverty and you want to end that cycle, the equality of outcome is not the way to do it. So like equality of start is actually the way you want to do it. And if you really, really, really want to do it, you do it with the children, not with the adults that are already in the welfare system, and it's become generational. So what you do is you have a much stronger welfare system for women that are on welfare that have children, but you have a stronger presence of government social workers that go in and make sure that they're getting the proper food, make sure that they're getting the trendy clothes so that when they go to school they don't have a low self-esteem, because children that don't have low self-esteem get higher grades. Children that are in elementary school that get higher grades go to better high schools. They're more likely to play sports. They're more likely to go on to better universities. Children that go on to better universities take better subjects and in the end get better careers and pay back more into the system than they would in the first place. I would also implement universal income for everybody, but not because I want people to just sit around and do nothing, because it's actually cheaper than the welfare system, the old age pension, the workers' compensation, the police, the healthcare system that we have. Because when people aren't in poverty, they don't get poverty illnesses. And believe it or not, there are illnesses that are surrounded within poverty. So
I believe it.
So we pay for our healthcare through our taxes. So if you have people that aren't getting those health issues that are stamped to poverty, that lightens the load in the healthcare system. It also, like, if you don't have to commit crimes to, make your day-to-day or get a little bit more, the police system is lightened up and you can go deal with real fucking crimes. The court system is also lightened up, so you're not spending as much money on that. And then also, like I said, welfare, old age pension, workers' compensation, all the money that you're putting into that now gets driven into the basic income for everybody, right? And it doesn't matter if you're working or not, everybody gets that standard basic income. And believe it or not, it is actually cheaper. Like, it
actually works.
Like, all economists agree it's cheaper.
Oh yeah, absolutely, I believe it. But like, my particular criticisms, I believe, are leveled at my particular system. You know what I mean? Because like, I'm in America, that's what I see every day. So like, I don't know how it is in Canada. I don't know how it is in Iceland. I don't know how it is in all these other places.
Okay, Kyle, can I ask you a simple question?
Yeah.
If you're find the flaws in the capitalist system in your country. Okay, yeah. I understand. That's something that we all do.
It's easy. Simple, right? Straightforward.
But what are your solutions to those problems? A. B. How is a failed system like socialism,
Marxism,
and Marxism is the same. So if you could call it Marxism, you can call it Marxist or post-Marxist theory, whatever. How will the implementation of that make any of those problems go away?
And what does it look like?
So what it looks like is essentially the idea of what does it mean for a person to get all of their value. So I had an idea for a business. I'm working on it. I'm doing the modeling and stuff. And basically,
you capitalist.
Hey, as long as I don't exploit anyone, it's all good Marxism. That's how it works.
No, it's capitalism.
No, it's not.
Anyway, go.
It's a relate.
Before I continue, you intend to make a product that people want to buy?
No. Let me define my terms for you guys so we all know what we're going from. Because you guys are saying capitalism is this, I'm thinking this, we're arguing about this, that.
Go ahead.
So to me, capitalism is the relationship the worker to privately held means of production by the capitalist, such that the worker doesn't get necessarily the full product of his wage or has no control over how like those means are distributed. In socialism, you can have a business in socialism, in a theoretical socialism system. It's just that you're running the business and your partner gets 50-50, or if you're doing 80% of the work, you get 80 and he gets 20. You know, it's just not set up so some dude can come in and he's like, I'll give you 50K, you give me 30% of whatever you make, good luck. And then if you can fucking tough it out, you give him 30% for life and you're fucked out at 30% of your value. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with Marxism. Marxism never said that if you work 50%, you get 50% of your wages. No. That's not what, or work 80% and you get 80% of the wages. Marxism clearly says that you are entitled to what you put forward. So if that individual put forward 30% to your business, he's entitled to 30% in perpetuity for his work, because technically that is part of his labor.
Do you mean like if some investor comes forward with 30% of the value, then he's technically entitled under what Marxism says?
Marxism says that that is his work, that is his labor. But his labor is, even if it's his investment is labor. He had to work to get that capital himself. Therefore, that labor, that is his perspective to you, to give you 30% of the initial cost of starting up your business. So that is your labor. That is his labor that he's offering to you freely.
Do you mean, Ed, do you mean like, so so take me, for example, do renovations for a living. If I have an employee that's doing 30% of the work, he's entitled to 30% of the profit?
Under our Marxist system.
Under a Marxist system, yeah.
Okay. So what happens when you have a smaller business? You have 10 employees, and this equals up to more than 100% of your running. And also, where is the benefit for the person that's actually taking the risk, going out, buying all the tools for the job, going out and doing all the estimates, taking the initial risk to start up the business? Where's the reward in that?
So I think, honestly, a good example to look at is like the Mondragon Corporation in Spain. They're a pretty good example. They're basically kind of like a worker-owned cooperative. And the way it ends up working is they produce, I think, a lot of consumer products. It's been a long time since I've looked them up, so honestly, you're going to have to double fact-check on me. You can, like, yell at me if I'm wrong later. You know what I mean? But
that's
or
a
less,
cooperative. I get what you're saying. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it's like workers' cooperative, essentially. And they have different departments that are worker-owned. I'm using quotation marks in the air. And basically these departments divide up labor and decide what products to develop and like decide which new things to create and et cetera. They have engineers and all this fancy shit, and they have like decide who votes on what, and it's like a whole system, and it works out for them. It's the 7th largest corporation in Spain, I think.
Okay, but they're a giant corporation, right? What about the small?
But they came from a small cooperative.
Yeah,
that's
but
my point.
Again, a cooperative is different than you initiating a business yourself. A cooperative means a group of individuals get together and decide that they will put in the same amount of effort and the same amount of financing to start a business together. They would all share in the profits equally. Whereas you're talking about starting up a business by yourself, asking for an investor to come in, and an investor gives you X number of dollars for a portion, because what he's under the Marxist system would be that his labor is worth money, because he's giving his labor up. So that is part of who he is. So that labor that he's giving up is worth something, and you have to recompensate his labor.
And I agree with that you need to compensate him, but 30% of your business is or 30% of the profit is insane to be giving up, because the worker's not taking any of the risk, right? Like if I take a job and it doesn't make any money, and that's happened to me, right? So I go and I do an estimate, and I underestimate the job, and it comes up fucking zero for me, right? If he's saying that he's only worth 30% of the business, then, or 30% of the profit, then on that job, that person gets zero, where right now I still pay him his $25 and $30 an hour, depending on the guy's experience, right? And it's not like I'm paying fucking slave, like $25, $30 an hour. That's good fucking money, man.
Oh yeah,
it's
of
not.
course. Yeah,
So it's not like I'm paying slave wages. I do, like, so go ahead and address that, Ed, and then.
The only
Hold on, real quick. I would show up and personally fight any of your employees for $20, $25 an hour, Dave. Yeah. I would try if you set up like a Thunderdome.
I told you that if we lived within the same area, I would teach you my trade. I already told you that. Not a sweat.
Yeah. Okay. Listen.
Yeah. Ed, go ahead, address that, and then I do have a question.
Yeah. The difference between a capitalist system and a Marxist system, simply, is that a capitalist means that the person who takes the greatest risk reaps the greatest reward. So if I am a shareholder in a company, I've put in X number of dollars to finance a company. It has to pay that money back to me. Whereas a Marxist system says the individuals that give up or are part of the system, they all give up their own labor, which is part of who they are as a person. Mm-hmm. They should be directly compensated in direct measure of what they put into the system. That's the difference.
You'd be fucked, Ed, you lazy bastard. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I am. I'm fucked. under a strictly capitalist system, I should be fucked. But because we're a social, it's totally different. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the individual that what you're talking about when you say you're going to start up a business, you're taking the original risk.
Yeah, and it's not just that too, right? It's like if a job fails, it's on me. If it doesn't come in on time, it's on me.
If a worker injured,
if a worker's injured, my insurance goes up. If it needs to get done on the weekend, I'm not gonna ask my fucking guy to come in on the weekend. He's got a family just like me. I'm the one that like Monday was our Labor Day, was our May Day, communist May Day. In capitalism, it's Labor Day. It just went by. I had to work on it because I'm not gonna ask fucking the guy to come in. Right. So, I mean, like, I'm the one that's taking the brunt of it. Why should, if I'm paying somebody fairly, why should I?
That's the capitalist system. That's just how it is. Like, I'm talking about.
But
like,
I'm saying.
Why is that person entitled to?
But hang on.
But if everybody did it like you did it, there would never be any issues, right?
What I'm saying though is what would be the reward for me to continue to do what I'm doing within a capitalist system? What would be the reward for me to strive to have my own business, to do things the way that I'm doing it, if I'm having to give up, if I have fucking 10 employees and they all fucking put out even 10% under the market system, that's 100% of my fucking earnings. What would be the purpose in me?
You're doing labor too. It's not like yours doesn't count.
Okay, so I only get 10% of my business?
Yeah.
If that's how much labor you're doing.
Oh, that's fucking insane.
Hold on. I want to come at this at a different angle too. Like, while these two gentlemen were gone and what would normally be the break on the show, which it isn't going to be in this episode, I gave you my short story on how I am personally in an upward trajectory because of hard work and determination. Yeah. And Dave here, as an entrepreneur, has recognized that. And if I was in a different circumstance, he would reward my hard work and my determination and my intelligence that he has recognized in me with a higher paid and a higher skilled job. And then that would also educate me, right? And this takes me back to the guy that sits home and smokes weed and plays Xbox all day. I could be that guy. I was that guy. I would like to be that guy now. But in a capitalist system, I am motivated to be better. And Dave, as an entrepreneur, recognizes that he can make money off of my motivation and my hard work in a symbiotic relationship. A fair trade, and that is not a crime. Yeah, that is actually fucking beautiful. It's beautiful. Well, that's capitalism.
But the problem,
not necessarily.
But the problem,
no, that is
the
the basis. Hold on,
produce.
I'm sorry, Ed.
That's
No, that
capitalism.
right there. That is the basis of capitalism.
Oh.
Now, I get that a lot comes with that, but that is capitalism. It is free exchange of labor and effort and resources and infrastructure to create something better.
But hold up.
I'm sorry, Ed.
The issue I have is Kyle is using the model of 19th century capitalism that has not brought into the 21st century. It has not brought in the fact that most modern capitalist countries mix in a social networking system. Whereas if Dustin is injured on the job, or let's say me, which I was.
They're not. He's talking about the U.S., he said.
Yeah, I'm injured on the job. The social network actually allows me to exist. Under a communist regime, I cannot put any labor in there because of my injury. My back is broken. I literally can't put any effort into it. There is no chance in under a socialist government that I get any income based on that. Whereas in a capitalist system, with modern capitalist system, with social networking, I'm able to still live, still feed my family, as well as actually add to the economy by paying what they give me back into the system.
I think in response to that, it's very important to note that the Constitution, and I don't like going to these countries, but it's something important to note, I think, is that the Constitution of the USSR had a right to food, a right to housing, a right to a job, a right to all these things, healthcare and all these things. So all these worries you have are generated essentially.
Okay. 60 million Ukrainians could not be reached for comment on that.
Hang on. Yeah, that's all fair. That's all fair and fucking great that they wrote that in there. But what happens when there is no food, when there are no fucking jobs for these people? Yeah, like and also if you don't think that was just fucking lip service, ask the people that built the Road of Bones. Seriously, man.
I mean, it's no different than any other country.
No, it is actually. Yes, it is different than other countries. Name one time in Canada, other than, and I'll admit this, other than when the English came over and they fucking ravaged the natives. Explain to me one time in Canadian history that our labor force has been forced to build a road going into the north and died the entire way. Do you even know what the Road of Bones is?
That's more an American thing with like the railroads and shit. And
but
that not a Canadian thing. You guys are chilling. You guys seem to be doing all right with the whole system. Let
me ask you something though. Let me ask you something. Okay, so communism wins the day in America, right? And fucking it's time to divvy out the jobs. And are you looking at, so is this an authoritarian system that you're looking at this point, or are you like?
I mean, with the internet and all this good stuff, we don't need to go authoritarian, do we?
Oh, okay. So then what happens when there's 1,000 doctors positions and there's 1,500 doctors?
Well, we got programmers and coders for all that, don't we?
No, you don't actually. So you have, okay, so listen, you have 1,000 positions for doctors, okay? You have 1,500 doctors. All of them want to be doctors. They don't want to do anything else. So if you send them to do another job, they're being forced to do the other job. How is that?
Why do you think in America there's 1,500 people who want to be doctors and only 1,000 people who want to be doctors, or 1,000 people who can be doctors?
But this is an example. It's an example, okay?
But
you have 1,000 positions for doctors. You have 1,500 doctors. You could do it with mechanics or anybody else.
But why deal with hyperbole when you have like a real example?
Your system only has enough. So, okay, go ahead. Give me the.
So right. So what do we have in America, right? You got all these kids raised by mommy and daddy, given the best.
Okay, but that's not. They're not in a communist system.
Talking about capitalism right now and explaining how there's already a shortage of doctors in America. I don't know how Canada's doing. Canada seems awesome, but
you're not understanding what I'm saying to you. You're not understanding at all. Listen. In a communist system, in a forced labor system, you only have so much need, right? So if you need 1,000 doctors, but you have 1,500 people that really want to be doctors, you're going to have to send those 500 people somewhere else. And you're going to have to force them to do something that they don't want to do. Right?
Oh, okay, hold on. In America, hold on. In America, if you have 1,500 doctors and 1,000 doctor spots, or 1,000 needs for doctors, the best, or generally speaking, the best of the 1,500 get to be doctors, which is good for everybody, right? You want good doctors instead of shitty doctors. And those other 500 doctors, they can still try to go into business and ask for less money and compete in that way and provide health care for people in the lower, income bracket because they're not asking for as much. Like, there's at least a chance for them, and there's a separating of those that are better and those that are worse, creating a superior system.
How can you avoid being I've had a few beers, an authoritarian when the system itself requires you to be, right? So like forced labor is going to require you to force people to do things that they don't actually want to do.
I suppose there's certainly an aspect of that, Okay. I mean, not all systems necessarily rely on that.
Let me finish. Let me move on. Okay, so the communist or the post-Marxist system is taken over in the United States. Nobody has a right to free property anymore. Who gets the best spots?
Wait. Not free property, private property. There's a difference.
Yeah. So
personal property versus private property. Okay.
So nobody has a right to private property anymore. Who decides who lives in the best spots and who decides who lives in the worst spots?
Who's doing what job? Near where?
Okay, but no, that's not that. Now you're making somebody's. You're kind of doing a capitalist thing by saying that somebody that has a better job should have a better spot to live.
Not necessarily a better job. Who's working near where? What makes the most?
But what happens? What happens if one of your your fucking hamburger flipper has no kids? Hang on. Let me finish. What happens if your hamburger flipper is working beside fucking Beverly Hills and he has no kids, and your doctor is fucking working on the other side of fucking town where there's only apartment buildings and he has 5 kids? How do you solve that problem?
We're not talking. We're getting rid of burger flippers, dude. What do you mean?
Well, how do you get rid of burger flippers? Who's going to do the bottom barrel jobs? Who's
talking about a complete cultural shift here, mate? It's difficult. You gotta remember, man. Like, if you're talking about what it takes to sustain a town, you need to integrate everything a town needs to live in the local area. You need to remove shit like McDonald's and replace it with I don't know what power plants and shit.
Okay, but if you replace, hang on, let me move through this. If you replace the McDonald's with power plants, okay, there's still going to be bottom of the end job. There's still going to be the job that's fucking really hard to do, and there's still going to be the job that's really fucking easy to do. That's the nature of labor. I don't know if you've been
split it up. Make one person do it 20 hours instead of making them do 40 hours. Fuck it.
So you're gonna have a doctor working over there. So what happens when you have an emergency? That doesn't make any sense, man. You can't. So you're going to have the doctor work 20 hours being a doctor. He's going to go over there, and then the guy that doesn't know how to be a doctor.
We're not talking about doctors. We're talking about mid-tier staff. Shit, dude. It doesn't have to be all like that. Jeez.
Okay. So where are they living?
What do you mean? We're getting a lot of concepts confused. If we're talking about a shit-tier job like janitors.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not getting anything confused.
We're not going to bring doctors down to do janitor level work.
Hang on. I'm asking you if in an egalitarian system like you're proposing, where that guy's fucking janitor job is worth just as much as the doctor, they're both getting paid the exact same thing. Who gets to live in the best spots?
They're not getting paid the same thing. Why would they get paid the same thing?
Because that is a social system.
That's a social system. That's the egalitarian system, is that the doctor is worth just as much as the fucking janitor.
Oh, okay, then hold on. Then who decides what jobs are worth more and what jobs are worth less if the market's not deciding? Who's deciding?
The workers. And thus the relationship between the workers and the means of production is changed to a socialist system. Because
hold on. So time out. Hold on.
Are controlled privately.
No.
Hold on. So I get to decide what my labor is worth. Like I am the labor force in America, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I get to decide. Okay. So I get to decide that me standing outside and making sure no one hits a forklift is worth more than your job.
Yeah, you could try and decide that. Other people might overveto you.
So now you're talking about democracy.
Okay, so hold on. That's fine. So everyone gets to vote on what jobs are worth what.
Sure, why not? This is one.
Sure, why not? Okay, no, that's fine.
So
I guess it's neo-Marxism.
Now we're taking votes, yeah?
It's never worked. That's never happened in a socialist system ever.
What do you mean? You know what a Soviet is, right?
Yeah, a Soviet has never, ever been able to negotiate their own labor under a dictatorship. Never, ever. I have never heard of it. Never seen it. Never read it. Never. I've spoken to hundreds of people from Russia. Never once have I heard them negotiate their law. Even modern unions are falling apart today because it doesn't work.
Before things get out of control, Ed's an anthropologist, just so you know.
He also owns 3/4 of the books in Newfoundland. Like I know he's making like an argument of ignorance, like I've never heard of it, but and he's not the smartest man in the world or anything. I just wanted to make that joke about Newfoundland. They're real dumb.
No, I mean I've studied Russia.
You guys are real dumb.
Russia intensely. I mean, it's not that I'm making an argument from ignorance. I mean, I've studied. I've read from about the pre-Russian Revolution, post-Russian Revolution, the Cold War, all the way up. I've done a lot of research on this. I've never ever had been presented with a paper or any evidence. I'd love to have been. I'd love to have read it. And if it is just an argument from ignorance, I'd love to be proven wrong. But I've never, ever seen a system in the Soviet Union where they were given the ability to negotiate their wages. Never.
I rounded it up. That was fun.
Secondly, if you say that people will get rid of the McDonald's, and this is the other slightly portion of socialism, is that it robs people of their culture.
Yeah.
You're saying you're to just suck dry anything that is not essential and to put in just what is essential for the needs of a person. That seems to be a dull and dreary world to me.
And that takes away the creativity and the arts go after.
Is
that.
McDonald's a need? Is that what we're comparing it to now?
No, he's not saying it's a need. He's saying it's a cultural
force.
There is a need for some place to be when both parents are working and they have kids and you haven't bought groceries this week. There is a need for something like McDonald's. Yes. Is McDonald's itself necessary for the survival of mankind? Like, no. But is there a need for something like McDonald's? Yes.
But it's not just a need. You have to go beyond just what is a need, because a person only needs to eat, drink, and sleep, and breathe.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
To be a human being, to be a conscious, sentient human being, you need way more than that. You need to be stimulated. You need to have a variety of outlets where you can be communal with one another, to hang out, to be introspective. That doesn't exist in the socialist system. Okay.
No, cool.
I apologize if I seem to be excited, but this is my first time being actually speaking to somebody who believes in post-Marxist theory. So
it's interesting, and thanks. I learned lots of new stuff.
Yeah, before we go, could we have like a little bit, 20 minutes or so? I want to talk about what's going on in the U.S.
Yeah, let's do that finally. Let's talk about current events.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's go.
Yeah. I'm gonna let Dustin start.
All right, let's go fast.
Because you guys are a lot younger than me, so I'm gonna let you guys go because I'm interested to hear what the two Americans have to say before the two older Canadians jump in.
Canada seems like a land of honey compared to like America.
In
Solve those problems.
some ways not. We're having the same issues right now. Lower, like a much smaller scale, but we are having Antifa versus fascist things in the streets here as well. So anyways, go ahead, Dustin.
I mean, well, my question to you would, I guess, be, how do you feel about Antifa? How do you feel about the current, what I would call false dichotomy set up right now between, like, either you are a fascist or you are in support of people that go out on the streets and commit violence against people that they feel like are fascists. So, like, how do you fall on this scale?
So I don't know if this is a non sequitur. If you think it's a non sequitur, let me know and I'll re-answer. But my thing that I learned really early on, being like kind of like a communist leftist type, is like the one group of people you don't want to feel disenfranchised from the economic system is 18 to 26-year-olds, you know. And we're all successful, you know. We've all figured out our way through the capitalist system. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like, I'm trying to start a business, I own a house, like, I'm chilling, you know. Like, it's not hard when you've got like a little bit of like knowledge and stuff. But
If you make more than $30,000 a year, you're in the top 1% of the planet. Just so you know.
oh, I know, I'm well aware of that. Yeah. But like when we talk about like what's going on with like Antifa and like the alt-right and all these like reactionary groups, it's very few fucking people. It's not very many people. It's just internet narcissists. It like goes back to like almost the very first thing I said. Like, I feel like, honestly, where it was like 100 people on the internet screaming as loud as fucking possible and just creating the mess for everybody else. And then like the news can't help but pick up on it because they're like screaming, you know, like if you saw some dude in the middle of the street rolling around on the ground screaming about like Nazis and shit, you'd be like, oh shit, what's going on with this guy? What the fuck? I don't know.
Yeah, but so let me.
Well, hold on. You asked the two Americans here. So aren't you one of those people? And like, once again, as Dave said at the beginning of the show, engaged in hyperbole. Like I've seen you talk about gulags, you know, or you know, I've so and here you are, you know, advocating for an extremist system, and like I do think that is a bit of a non sequitur. How do you, sir, feel about using violence to stop people that identify as far right?
As far right? Well, depending on what they're advocating. Yes. But I mean, as far as violence is concerned, the way I personally, in my opinion, is you should always have violence as a tool in your toolbox. It shouldn't be the first tool, but you should have it in your toolbox. Ideally, all the way at the bottom is the last thing you want to pull out.
Okay, so we did an interview with an alt-right guy a while ago, and he said pretty much the same thing about, he said the left is using violence, the left is using intimidation tactics, why shouldn't we? So it doesn't seem like you're making things
nope,
better here, you're giving them coverage.
I mean, the problem is like, me personally, I'm not the violent type. Like, I mean, I make jokes and shit online about like that kind of shit, and maybe I shouldn't. I've been trying to relax on that because sometimes, you know, like when you're on the internet too much, you get a little like upset about shit, and you're like, oh, fuck this, you know, and that's like how you get in. But like, in reality, when it comes to political violence and violence against authoritarians or people who perceive themselves to have authority, whether in a political sense, whether left or right, it never works. It makes them retreat deeper. Studies have shown this. We all know this. And that's why me personally, I think the left has the capacity to build where the right extremist groups only kind of have this capacity to destroy. They like face themselves in destroy.
Hold on. Is it like deconstruction theory and like which side is trying to deconstruct society and rebuild it in the way that they think it should be? Like that's not the
Is that deconstructionist theory? Like somebody's trying to
I mean, like, no, that's not deconstruction theory. Deconstruction theory is bringing everything down to its like basic components. But I'm talking about the whole idea of the left and feminism, like smash patriarchy, like the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. Like I've asked you about Antifa, and you still haven't directly answered me, like if you're a supporter or not.
Oh yeah, sure, they're great.
Yes. Oh, okay, they're great. So like
political violence is.
Some of them are assholes.
Like hold on. A cop was burned alive at the G20 summit. Protesting capitalism. The most successful countries in the world in their meeting. And you support that.
I don't support burning people alive. That's fucked up.
But you support a group that I mean, like that's their tactic is to go out with Molotov cocktails and poles and they beat people. Like there's been people, innocent bystanders have been attacked, and you support this. Like why is my question. Like I'm not going to batter you over that. Okay, like you support it, but like why? What justifies the violence for you?
I mean, to me, this is kind of, I guess, like a complex topic because I don't necessarily know that Antifa is actually effective at this particular aspect of it. But when we look at the past, at what it took to acquire like a lot of the rights that we enjoy today, so like the May Day riots in like America and all that shit, people had to go out and die and like fight for these things, And so having people out there that are out there, even if they're fucking it up, I hope they like. Not all of them are doing this, and the media focuses on the most fucked up ones, And I hope they develop and learn to actually fucking be an effective force that like can fucking do something.
So let me put this in perspective. So like the Berkeley riot, where an individual was going to speak, utter words. What was the effective mayhem that came out of that? Was that something that was enabling a cause? Was that that was not reminiscent of the May Day riot. Wasn't that reminiscent of the riots of the 1960s?
False equivalence.
It was strictly a display of power, honestly.
No, to me it was
it doesn't mean, and it was not necessarily the best display of it, but that's what they did. They said they were going to shut it down, and they shut it down.
But was it effective
in the long run? Probably not.
To me, that's a sign of bullying and intimidation. That has never been a left idea. And I'm from the left, and but I've never, ever would see the use of violence to shut down a free speech.
I mean, like, do you realize that that's legitimizing the other side to do that to you?
Absolutely.
Like, should they show up with violence to stop your ideas and your demonstration?
They do.
Where?
What?
They do?
Where?
When was the last time a group of white nationalists showed up outside to stop your shit?
That's true.
Yeah.
So they don't.
So like let's go back. Okay, so the history of Antifa in America, being anything that anyone gave a fuck about is when Donald Trump was elected.
It was actually the 1920s. Like 1930s.
The modern incarnation, like I'm not talking about antifascista like against the Nazis. I said in America, right here in the United States.
1920s UK is where Antifa started, not the United States. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, so I said in America recently is when Trump was elected, and the fires and mayhem and burning things, and okay, that's one thing. And then when they started to gain notoriety again is in Berkeley I can see people having problem with Milo, particularly he was there to out what they would call undocumented migrants.
Milo's a cunt. Let's just be real.
Milo's a cunt, and we all agreed about that on this show. Like that's not the point, but they showed up and they used violence over and over and over. They just shut down in Canada, like Jordan Peterson and Gad Sad. We just did a cover over it.
Free speech.
They in Boston they showed up to protest. Nobody. It was like, Shiva running for Senate and some other people with Black Lives Do Matter signs being called Nazis and spat on and shit. Very, very little white supremacist action. Like, they have stirred the nest. They have silenced other people from speaking, and now those people show up in force to say, no, we can speak. Like, why are you supporting this instigation, this introduction of violence into regular political discourse? Like, I've been watching the entire time, and I'm baffled.
So, I think this harkens back to like what I was talking about earlier with the oligarchy study from Stanford/Princeton. I can't remember which place it's from. But essentially, when we talk about like people being represented, America doesn't function in that sense. We know that. We know how gerrymandering works. We've seen that shit.
Non sequitur, though. You do not have an Antifa.
Therefore, smash windows.
No,
like
leads
therefore,
to people being disenfranchised, and this is what happens. Like I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it.
No.
But you support it. You have explicitly supported it on this show. You explicitly support it online all the time. You encourage these people. Why are you encouraging political violence? Like you don't want it used against you. Like me and Ed and Dave here disagree with you politically. You don't want us to gang up and kick your ass, right?
Death threats and shit.
Like
North Carolina is the best state to get death threats from. I get a lot of death threats from North Carolina.
Yeah.
From North Carolina? Well, I have family from South Carolina, and I'm sure North Carolina is a very unhappy place. Whatever. I don't like. Sure. I'll say this. I don't get very many death threats. I guess I'm awesome.
Yeah.
And I'll say this, man. Maybe if you don't go around advocating for the overthrowing of the government and political violence and all this shit, you won't get death threats. I don't mean to blame the victim, but I'm blaming the victim.
Let's just.
We're at 2 hours. Go ahead.
Let's just look at the American, what the founding of America. It's probably the most important thing in the force for freedom of the individual that has ever existed. Straight out of the French Revolution, came after the revolution to form your country. It is the most freedom ever given to individuals in the world. And their constitution is ironclad. It is probably the best constitution ever written, put to pen. Yet, you have not just you've just elected a president that you're dissatisfied with, but he was elected. Whether you like it or not, he was elected. If the only way to change that is to get more people out to vote, not political violence, not assassination attempts, it is political motivation to change. That didn't happen in your country. You left it to chance, and you lost that chance. It can't. So what? The only way to change something politically in your country is to elect it. If only 33% of your population is getting out to the vote, that is a fault of the electorate, not the outcome.
It's not a systematic issue. It seems like a systematic issue.
What? 33% of the 33% of the people that came out to vote for the presidency voted for the rest of you. That is not a system problem. That is a people problem.
How is that not a systematic issue?
Because 33% of your population came out to vote.
Why didn't more vote?
It has nothing to do with the system. It has to do with what the people.
I'm going to say that there's problems with their system. No, like I think that there are problems in the system that should be changed. Like we could do mandatory voting. We could actually have a viable third party. We could not. We could get rid of gerrymandering. God fucking right, we can, man.
I gotta.
Hold on. But none of these. We don't have to destroy capitalism to do these things,
not.
right? Okay, so we can agree on not do. Can we?
Absolutely.
Hold on, right quick. Can me and you agree that maybe we shouldn't destroy capitalism?
My preference would be a peaceful transition to some kind of post-scarcity, super capitalist, super communist, utopian, whatever. I don't want people to
okay, but scarcity is a real thing. There's limited resources. We're a finite planet. We're growing population.
Even so,
how do you do that?
I still wish for a peaceful transition where we deal with all these problems we have through the power of people working together and voting and labor and all that fucking fancy human shit.
I wish for daily blowjobs from redheads, but that's not what we're talking about. Like, what?
Well,
what? Like no, you have to. Yes, and the real problem is scarcity.
Yeah,
but
you can't have a post-scarcity economy because scarcity is real.
Yeah, but you can.
We are a growing. Hold on, no. Hold on. We are a growing population on a finite planet. That means scarcity is real.
Yeah.
Okay? So you cannot have a system without scarcity. Okay? This is why, like, in a private message, you told me what your official ideology is, and I made a poke at you. I said, like, yeah, I wish Star Trek would come true, too.
Yeah.
Like, here's the thing, man. Until we have a super intelligent robot that does everything for us, and we have infinite resources, it's like, I'm going to make the same statement about capitalism that is said about democracy. It is the worst system until you look what the other options are.
Well, it's the best worst system we have.
There you go. Whatever. It's what else has succeeded? What else has lifted billions out of poverty? You know, like once again, like your argument, yes,
million.
by adopting capitalism. We have went over this, and we okay. Great. So when they do capitalism super hard, it does super well. Like, and I'm saying that they should actually soften it with socialism and democracy. And we're in 2 hours of this, and it's been a fantastic conversation. Anyone else? I'm done. I'm tapping out. Tapping out. It's been fantastic.
The last comment I have is that if you really want political change in your country, it starts from the ground up. Doesn't start with riots in the street. Doesn't start with violence. That's the last resort. I mean, that's what the French Revolution was, and that was what the American Revolution was. That was the last resort. And I know you said that, but when you accept and endorse a group like Antifa, and or if you were on the opposite side, I would say the alt-right or the fascist or the white supremacists, when you endorse a group like that, you are giving them political cover to do what they will, and you are accepting some of the responsibility for their actions. It is as simple as that. And that's a sad reality.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, it's no different than being American and accepting responsibility for all of America's various shits. You know, I mean, Canada's cool. You guys are chilling. You guys don't do anything. You guys are just.
Yes, we did.
You keep saying that. You love Canada. You don't know their history. Like, you weren't made to feel guilty. Hold on. You weren't made to feel guilty about their history. Like, trust me, there's a lot of dead Eskimo babies.
Oh, God.
They actually ate them alive. That's the end of the show, guys. Have a good night. No, I'm just kidding.
No, we didn't. But there's some stuff. Okay. I'll end this, but I'm gonna end this on a quote that Kyle's gonna fucking hate from one of my favorite capitalist politicians, Sir Winston Churchill. The inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharings of blessings. The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries.